As we enter a period where it seems that architectures are making quite bold statements with contemporary design, do you feel that the interiors and the layouts of these buildings, these high-rises downtown, are as thoughtful as the exteriors?
I think.
Do the floor plans suck today, Pat?
Well, I think to be. Let's just say that I think that there's a lot of that in many cases there's significant room for improvement. As a firm that's been involved in residential architecture in Chicago for almost 80 years, we have, I think, accumulated a lot of knowledge and insights about what makes living space workable. And I think one thing that we try to bear in mind is that it's one thing to create a sort of icon for the city or a building that has great street appeal. It's another thing to create space that really, really works for people and a very livable environment over the long haul. And one thing that distinguishes residential architecture is that in the end, the project isn't successful unless it is validated by individuals spending their own hard-earned money because there's something there that they want. So we try to always keep in mind that while the flashy image of the building may be what gets people to come to the sales center or maybe what gets them through the front door, that if you're not prepared to deliver something that they can see meets their needs or is flexible enough to be adapted to their needs, they're not going to buy.
What do people want in 2007 in a floor plan? What are some of the trends?
Well, one of the things that we've seen happen, and which is very apparent to me, and I think Joe probably recognizes this as well, that when we started in this business, city housing was basically the same as it had been for 50 years, which is little rooms for separate functions. And aside from providing perhaps flashier kitchens and bigger closets, things hadn't changed much. What I think we've seen happen is that because of the influence of loft spaces, where architects and developers of necessity created much more open floor plans.
Why doesn't Frank Lloyd Wright get credit for that? He created the open floor plan.
Oh, but Frank Lloyd Wright was frankly no pun intended, was an anti-urbanist. He didn't believe that cities were healthy. In fact, that toward the end of his career, he spent many years promoting his broadacre city concept, which essentially meant that each person would have their own little piece of ground, which, if you think of it, is an extremely suburban idea, and railed against cities as being evil and the embodiment of all that was wrong with society. So I agree with you. He certainly had an influence on open plans, but I would say that open plans as they pertain to large multi-use buildings are much more recently a result of people's experience with loft space, where spaces were created that double functioned. There were partial height walls, higher ceilings, more volume to the space, window walls with a lot of glass. Those kinds of things have really kind of fed back into the mainstream, first through the construction of what were essentially new construction lofts in neighborhoods where all the existing stock had already been converted, and yet there continued to be demand, such as in the West Loop here or the South Loop. But you now see that even seeping back into some of the much more expensive product that that traditionally was built on very much a separate room, separate function basis. Much more open interiors, much more flexibility.
Things like the great room, for instance.
More expansive views, kitchens that open. 25 years ago, a kitchen was a room with space in the corner for a table. Now, a kitchen is, in most cases, part of the living space. And the kitchen itself has become a showpiece. Sometimes I wonder how often it's used as a kitchen, but it's not uncommon to have people spend $50,000 or more on cabinets and very expensive appliances because they're beautiful to look at and they complement the overall look of the apartment and create an environment that people enjoy. And those spaces are now opened up because people have found that you don't have guests over and seat them in your dining room and bring out the food anymore. They're likely to participate in the creation, or at least keep you company while you cook. And so I think those kinds of spaces are a direct result of what people saw and experienced in loft conversions.
In some of the contemporary high-rises downtown, we're seeing even bathrooms be a little more open. I'm thinking of Brennanstall and Lynch's high-rises, 550 St. Clair and 535 St. Clair, where there's been a seamless transition between the bedroom and the bathroom. Do you think that will become more of a mainstream thing?
I think that's an obvious trend. Again, that ties back to who are the occupants. In most cases, single people and couples. So the traditional bathroom, which was designed for privacy from who? In other words,
From your wife, Pat.
well, there is a need for to continue to acknowledge the functional realities. But for example, it's one thing to enclose shower space and toilets. It's another thing to enclose vanities and dressing areas and so forth completely, because do you really need to? I think what we're going to see, if you look around the world at how people use housing and what they're accustomed to, people coming here from other countries continue to be astonished at the size of American houses. Now, if you were raised in the suburbs in 5,000 feet, you might find a 900-foot apartment or condominium feels a little tight. But to somebody who was raised in France or England or Germany or in the Far East, they would find that quite indulgent. And I think that where you see the leading edge of that trend is probably in Canada, in Toronto, and perhaps Vancouver, both of which have become very international cities and are attracting people from around the world. If you look at the kind of housing that's being offered there, it's very much smaller. It's smarter. It's sleeker. American kitchen cabinets are still 24 inches deep. Who uses the last 6 inches of counter except as a place to park the toaster? So you look at European kitchens. They're much more compact, and yet they're still functional. People make great meals. They just don't have the amount of waste space built into them that we take for granted.